Yo, what's going on? Welcome back to Generation Red. As you can tell, I am not in my usual recording setup. I'm currently sat in Doncaster in a hotel room about to do my UEFA C licence coaching course, but it does give me perfect chance to rack off some of these videos that I've been meaning to do. First of all, shouts to all the Salford fans this season that have been pulling us aside and asking when the podcast is coming back and if we are still making content. We are. We just took a break last season while we focused on other stuff and Myles worked on his football, so appreciate everyone that does pull aside. It does mean a lot, but it just means we've been able to go to Salford and actually enjoy just being a fan there and not worrying about a podcast and talking about things. But make sure you do click subscribe because we are going to be dropping a bunch of videos. Starting with this one, we've got a few more that are going to be coming out over the next few days. So please, as I say, click subscribe, drop us a comment and let us know if you like the video on our social media platforms.
Shawty on the beat.
Right, that's it. Salford's 24-25 season has come to an end with a little bit of heartbreak as Salford did miss out on the playoffs on the last day of the season by 1 point as we couldn't get it across the line against Carlisle and Chesterfield pipped us for that 7th position in the playoffs. So I was going to wait until the full League 2 season campaign was done, but with Wimbledon playing Walsall on Monday, I figured let's just get this done. It's not going to change anything, is it? I think Salford just missing out on the playoffs on the last day of the season against Carlisle, who, let's be honest, had nothing left to play for. They were already relegated and Salford had everything to play for. It did sting a little bit myself, and I'm sure a lot of Salford fans assumed that was already sewn up. But hindsight's a beautiful thing. Now, I did do an interview with the BBC quite recently, and they asked me if I thought it was a bit of a disappointment for Salford not to get into the playoffs. And they were quite surprised that I said if you would have offered me that at the start of the season, I would have absolutely snapped your arm off. If someone would have said to me after the 23-24 campaign that Salford are going to put in a challenge for the playoffs and miss out on the last day of the season by 1 point, it would have hurt. Obviously, a little bit of heartbreak's always there. But I would have bit your hand off to see Salford playing some good football, challenging for it as well, and also stringing together some of the games that we did do, especially across the November, December and early January phase of this season. I thought Salford were fantastic. But it does sting a little bit, but yeah, like I say, if you'd have said to me in pre-season that was going to be Salford's season, I would have absolutely took it all day. And the BBC was surprised by that, so let me know in your comments if you think it was a bit of a flop of a season, because considering where we was in 23-24 and the absolute shambles of that season, I would have took this one all day of the week. And when you look at the squad that we had in pre-season going into this year for Carl Robinson, it was an absolute mess. If we go all the way back to pre-season, for me, it was weird. Obviously, on the surface level, the club are back playing. We're all excited to be fans and in the stands watching Salford play. Nice little trip over to Belfast. We got an Everton game at home where we managed to beat Everton. So pre-season, results-wise, wasn't too bad. But behind that, when you actually look at the squad Carl Robinson was using, it was a lot of trialists. We had a very, very thin first-team squad. We actually had no goalkeepers until the middle of the transfer window, which did really make me question how Carl Robinson was going to fare this season. He was going to have to bring in a new team that was going to have to gel quite quickly as the season and the first game against Port Vale was quickly approaching. Now, during pre-season, we actually did a live stream called the Robinson Rebuild, and we looked at the squad and the number of players that were going out, and it was pretty dire reading, I'll be totally honest. Now, take yourself back to pre-season. A lot of high-profile players in Salford squad did end up leaving. Top goal scorer Matt Smith retired. Elliot Watt's contract was up and he moved up to League One with Burton Albion. Callum Hendrick did sign an extension but was quickly sold to MK Dons. Alex Cairns, club captain, also got a move back to his boyhood club, Leeds United. Big shout out to Alex Cairns, by the way. Not a fan of Leeds United, but to see him at his boyhood club now going into the Premier League, it was quite nice to see. He was a top player for Salford, Alex, so I wish him all the best. But we had Stevie Mallon and McLennan, who both left on free contracts after theirs expired. Theo Vassell was offered a new contract and decided to move to Barrow without even letting the club know, apparently. So he'd left. Luke Bolton had obviously left in the January to go to Wrexham, and Declan John returned to his former club, Bolton Wanderers. So if we go back to pre-season, the squad was extremely thin. I actually remember being sat at the Crusaders game in Belfast with Stroh and Danny from the One Up Front podcast. Shouts to them, go and check them out. And we was actually saying the squad was full of trialists. There was players we couldn't even identify on the pitch. Andre Wisdom was at centre-back, and the goalkeeper was never even named. A lot of the players weren't even announced of who they were. They were all trialists and young lads coming through. So bear in mind the Port Vale game was approaching quite quickly. I was very worried for Salford's season this year. However, it did change, and once it changed, it happened quite quickly. We got drip-fed one or two signings at the start, but then it felt like towards the back end of the window, it was almost every day when players were coming in, which did get some excitement going. Now, the first signing that Salford announced was young Canadian forward Robbie Cleary. We didn't actually see much of him this season. I thought he looked okay in pre-season, but he spent the majority of this one out on various different loans, and he did rack up a couple goals, especially towards the back end of the season. So I'd be interested to see Robbie Cleary, as he has been retained, maybe force his way into Carl Robinson's squad for this season. As I say, the signings were sort of drip-fed for a couple of weeks, and then we did get a large amount and a quick roller coaster of them all coming through. Low moves for the likes of Tyrese Forner, Matty Young, Stefan Negru, Kouassi and Okoronkwo all coming in on loan, and then the likes of Osterfield, Jamie Jones, Woodburn, Stockton, Minoga, James Chester, Tom Edwards, John Taylor and Adelaide all signing on permanent deals, some of them on 12 months. But we'll go into that a little bit further down. But like I say, the squad started filling out and some really significant players coming in. Ben Woodburn, obviously coming from Preston, very highly rated player from his time at Liverpool. I think he was the youngest ever. Was he the youngest ever goal scorer for Liverpool? Now, when you take into account the team that finished the 23-24 season, only Matty Lund, Kelly Amai, Ryan Watson, Conor McElhenney, Curtis Till and Garbett from the first team were still around going into this season. Obviously, the club did have Kevin Burko, but he didn't really play much in the season before. Osama Rasley was at the club. He was a new player last season, but his injury kept him out for the majority of it. So we only really seen him this season coming in. Shep was out for the majority of last season with an injury, and Dan Chesters was on loan from West Ham, but he did sign a permanent deal. This was a full rebuild side going into 24-25 for Carl, and it definitely shown. It took 6 games for Salford to pick up a win as they beat MK Dons 1-0 at home in a game, if I'm being totally honest, I didn't think we'd win, and we probably didn't deserve it, but 3 points are 3 points, especially against MK Dons. But if we're honest and we go back to the start of the season, it wasn't great. We did say on the live stream that we thought the club would need to gel as a team of players because so many players were coming in from different leagues and trying to fit into Carl Robinson's philosophy of football, and that definitely was the case. It took us to around the middle of October for us to start seeing a consistent run of performances from Salford. A brilliant home win against AFC Wimbledon, followed by an away loss at Grimsby. Salford then went on to pick up points from 15 of the next 17 games against some great opposition. Many of them are now in the playoffs, or were in the playoffs, taking us to mid-January before we were absolutely smashed away to Manchester City. This was around the same time that Matty Young forced himself into the first team, taking Jamie Jones' #1 squad, and he had that fantastic run of 7 games without a goal conceded against him. Matty Young, for me, came in and provided a massive level of calmness, especially behind Curtis Till and Stefan Negru. He was a vital player for them games going into the Man City one. It did take a knock. He managed to lose his spot again to Jamie Jones. He managed to pick up a good string of performances before Matty Young managed to force his way back into the squad and finish the season quite strong. But for that moment of October, November, December, Salford was sitting second in the automatic spots, and we all started to dream a little bit. From the City game though, this is when our season kind of tipped on its head. We brought in Lewis Wannington on loan and Longello, but we had injuries to the likes of Osama Rasley, Garbett, Kelly and Mai and Ben Woodburn, which made massive difference in the team for me. It was really at the point where Salford were just dropping points when we didn't need to. And I said this on another podcast, it was at this point where Salford weren't winning, they weren't losing, we were just racking up back-to-back draws, and we really struggled at home. We just struggled getting the ball in the back of the net for the foreseeable, right up until around March time, where we actually started to put a consistent string of games together. But from that City game, it just sort of tipped itself on its head, and we never really recovered from it. Injuries don't help, but to see us go from second in the automatics to now outside the playoffs within the space of 8 weeks was a bit blowing, wasn't it? Me personally, I think the biggest game in Salford season that ultimately determined where we ended up this season was against Accrington Stanley when we lost 2-1. It's a game we should have won. Accrington were really poor, but we just didn't start. We just didn't turn up on the pitch, and that cost us our playoff spot. I think if Salford beat Accrington like they should have done at that point, we're now, well, hopefully we're getting ready to look at Monday as a playoff final to go into League One. But wasn't to be. Obviously, we can look at the Carlisle and go, we should have beat them, but Carlisle, when you look at it on the surface, they were already down, but that was their last opportunity in front of home fans to give a sign-off and say thanks for the season, and they definitely did that. 2-2, it finished. I think the Accrington Stanley game, for me, was the most vital one in that run-up to the playoffs, and unfortunately, we couldn't get it over the line. But as I say, though, if we look at the season as a whole, I'm quite happy with how it ended up. Obviously, I would rather have been in the playoffs and now fighting for the playoff final on Monday, and that wasn't to be. But if you'd have said to me, finish just outside the playoff, go into an FA Cup third round away against Manchester City, not concede a goal for 7 games, considering where he was in pre-season with no goalkeepers and a very, very thin squad, I'd have said that would have been a success at the start of the season. I've got to stand by that. I just hope Carl Robinson can now turn this into some consistency and we can have a real good push for promotion this year. The ownership has been changed. The class of 92 have now left, with Beckham and Gary Neville being the ones that remain. I'm glad that has been done now, because it has to be done now to give Carl Robinson a chance to push himself and really start the recruitment process going into this new season. We cannot be going close to August looking for players to come into the squad. We've got to be doing these deals now, really. And I'm sure they are. I'm sure the recruitment is ongoing. I'm sure they've probably identified a couple players that they want to look in. I've got another video coming out of players I think Salford should look at, whether we get them. I'm not the money man, but I think the recruitment has to start now. Hopefully we do start seeing some announcements in the near future. I know a couple of clubs have already been announcing players, so if Salford can get on that bandwagon and get some players in before pre-season starts, I think Carl has a great, great opportunity to push his way into the playoffs or even the automatics. You never know. Just on the wrap up, as I say, we will do another video talking about the ins and outs of the club, but Salford have announced the departures of Matty Lund. I am upset. Ryan Watson, John Taylor has gone over to Radcliffe. Conor McElhenney now leaves the club. Jez Davis, Liam Shepherd, Marcus Dacus, Callum Morton, James Carr, Ben Collins, Liam Humbles, Sandro da Costa, Jacob Hannam, Easy Bowen, Matty Kukos, Aidan Lancaster and Kamoy McNair all leave the club as their contracts have now expired, and the likes of Matty Young, Stefan Negru, Tyrese Farner, Lewis Warrington, Okorowanko and Kawase have all returned to their parents' club from loan, and again we find ourselves with a massively thin squad going into pre-season. But as I've just said, hopefully the recruitment starts and we can all get excited in the next couple of weeks as we move into the summer period. And some beautiful names. Lionel Messi is coming to Salford. Let's start it. Let's get the rumour going. But if you like the content, I'm going to make sure this keeps coming out throughout pre-season. Just bear with us on a few things, but the podcast will be back as well. Myles wants to get back involved, so that's beautiful. Make sure you click subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the season so far. Am I well off the topic and it was absolutely rubbish? Do you think Salford could have done any more? Could we have done any less? At the start of the season, would you have took the outcome that they've got now? But shout out to everyone that supports as always. Please, as I said, do click subscribe. Helps the channel grow. And we'll try and get some more players back on the platform. See you soon.